everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Haunted houses. Often we picture the ones set up for Halloween. A once-occupied structure complete with warped doors, shattered windows, and darkness. A place where our pulse begins to quicken. Of course, not all haunted houses present themselves so obviously. Their doors aren't always warped, and their windows perfectly intact. So if not the way it looks, what makes these forsaken homes sources of such boundless uneasiness? What is so terrifying about them? Could it be that these haunted houses mirror the stories of lives once lived? Tales of love, loss, and tragedy, all woven together with an unbreakable thread of memory. As broken whispers of the departed echo through these living tombs, we're forced to face the stark reality of our fragile existence, the inevitable mortality of those we love. Or is it possible that what really frightens us is our innate fear of the unknown? That ghosts dwelling within these homes remind us of the mysteries that surround the universe, things just barely beyond the reach of our understanding. Tonight, we venture into the depths of those haunted dwellings, perhaps finding solace in the shadows, and maybe even gaining a glimpse into the secrets that have been buried within forgotten memories. So, let's get started, shall we? I graduated from SCU in 1998. Though people always talked about how the university was haunted due to it being buried on an ancient Indian burial ground, it wasn't until my third year I actually experienced something myself. Inching towards finals, I'd been studying later than normal, and not in the student housing building because that was nearly impossible. And the thing about this school is it doesn't look spooky or dilapidated, not even at night. But this night, it for sure was spooky. I was sitting with my back to the bookshelves. Behind me, I heard movement on the shelf. I remember thinking, I didn't see anyone go back there. It suddenly sounded like a book fell, and almost immediately, many books. I turned to see if someone needed help, but I didn't see anyone or any books. Incredibly curious, I walked over to the other side of the bookcase, and sure enough, there were about 5 books on the floor, but there was no sign of an actual person. However, someone would have had to pass me to leave the library. I saw no one. To make matters worse, when I went back to where I was seated, my pencil all but disappeared, and still, I had never seen anyone walk by or near me. Tonight I was helping my cousin set up his new basketball hoop, and I watched him play a little after we finished. Just as we were about to go inside, I heard a little girl screaming for help. It sounded like she was near our pond. I was shaking. My cousin had already gone inside, but when he came back out, the noise stopped. I kept shaking as I walked inside to tell my fiancé. She looked out our bathroom window to see a little girl by the pond. She called me over to look, but the girl was already gone. We've heard knocking and howling, but this was a first. I don't know what's happening. I'm seriously terrified. I checked for any trace of an actual little girl, but there's no sign of anyone having been down there. It's so muddy, there would have been footprints or some trace left behind. I know it wasn't a real kid. If she'd fallen into the water, there would have been ripples and splashing, but the surface was calm and serene. I've been reading up on skinwalkers. I'm 60% native. We just had a child, and Lots of negative things are going on in the family right now. I think it's feeding off of these things. I'm going to start catching the stuff on camera so everyone can see what I mean. I'm a 32-year-old male who's been deeply interested and affected by the paranormal. I've always gotten weird vibes in certain places, and I've always seen shadow people from the corner of my eye. As a child, it used to feel like someone or something watched while I slept. I'd beg my parents to let me sleep in their room, but they always said no, and I'd have to return to my room, terrified. Every night I dreamed of being chased by a monster, until I just stopped running, let myself get killed. Then I suddenly jerked awake. The only time I ever slept peacefully was when we got a gray kitten. I feel like he protected me. The bad dreams went away entirely during the year we had him. I turned 30 in 2021, and I was the opening manager at a Neapolitan pizza shop next to a GameStop. Every day I arrived at 7 a.m., started the dough, and got the wood fire oven hot, and I always heard weird things. Pots and pans would clang together, spatulas fell to the ground, doors would open, lights turning on and off, and when I approached the switch, it stopped. No one else arrived until 10, so I was always creeped out. I usually blasted my music in an attempt to dull the fear. One day I arrived at the usual time, noticed a deposit bag lying in the middle of the kitchen. It was too far away from the door to have been tossed inside by a good Samaritan, so I assumed the closing manager had slipped up. I opened the bag and saw a deposit for $1,500 in cash with a GameStop receipt on it. It weirded me out, but I shrugged it off. Waited for the GameStop employees to arrive so I could return the bag. When the manager arrived, I walked next door and presented him with the bag. I'll never forget the way he looked at me. He was half confused and half suspicious, as if I'd stolen the bag or something. He wanted to know how I got the bag. I said I found it in the middle of the kitchen. He'd closed the night before, so he was even more confused than ever. He distinctly remembered putting the deposit in the safe and locking up the store. I assured him I wouldn't be returning the bag if I had stolen it, and he asked if I ever heard sounds or saw weird things. I told him our store was haunted as hell. Apparently, he had experienced the same things rather frequently. And this is where it gets really weird. GameStop always has PlayStations and Xboxes inside some sort of plastic container, but because of COVID, the Sony technicians hadn't been to the store for a year and a half. The manager said that they didn't have keys to the container, so he couldn't open it to change games. There was a thick layer of dust on top of the PlayStation, with a toddler's handprint right in the middle. I was spooked. He thought it was a child's ghost haunting our stores, and he never believed in the paranormal before these experiences. He was a scientific type guy, but that all changed after working there for a few years. His whole worldview shifted after seeing that handprint. Hello, my name is Alexa, and I'm 35 years old. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal. I've attracted things both human and non-human. This was not my first experience, but it stands out because of how I felt. When I was 12, I would walk to and from school, and I always took a shortcut through the local cemetery. One day, I fell in the cemetery, and I saw bare feet right in front of me. I immediately felt very uneasy. When I stood up, I saw a woman. She was wearing a knee-length white nightgown. She had long black hair. She was looking down at her feet. I felt very unsettled. like I could be in danger. She looked at me. When I said hello, that's when I noticed her eyes were blood red, almost reptilian, with vertical pupils. It felt like she was looking through me. She said that I should be more careful, and I needed to go home. Then she disappeared. I never saw her again. I have no idea what she was, but I inherently knew that she could have killed me. If anyone knows what she could have been, please let me know in the comments. My dad has vascular dementia, lives in an assisted living facility. I come over a couple times a week to drive him to doctor appointments, fill up his medication. So we have a key to his room. Last week, he said that management found my key in one of the bathrooms. I looked in my purse and sure enough, that set of keys were missing. I asked him to hang on to them and I'd get them on my next visit. I went a couple days later, and when I looked down at my purse, my key ring was there. They weren't missing after all. It was weird, but I shrugged it off. When Dad answered the door, he had my keys and handed them to me. That set has one key for his door, one for his mailbox, and a library key fob. I showed him that those weren't mine, suggested that they might belong to one of his nurses. I had passed a couple of them on the way earlier, so I jogged down the hall and asked if the keys belonged to them. Not only was it theirs, but there's only one mailbox key per room. If I had mine, then the other one shouldn't be missing. One of the nurses, Rachel, turned to the other nurse and whispered, "The only thing I can think of is Bob." Both of their faces went pale, and Rachel thought to call the library to say we found a key fob that we wanted to return. The librarian said they couldn't give out personal information, that they'd have to contact the owners themselves. So, Rachel blurted out that if it belonged to who she thought it did, he wouldn't mind because he's dead, and she asked if the owner's name was Bob. The librarian confirmed his full name, and after taking a few moments to herself, Rachel explained that Bob was the last resident to live in my dad's room, and that he had died in there. His room had been empty for 3 years, because anytime a new resident moved in, they would complain about the room being haunted and demand to be moved. My dad is the first person who hasn't noticed. He's been in there for 6 months. Now, it seems that Bob has finally returned his keys. I was on an RV trip with my grandparents and cousin, heading from Las Vegas to Oregon. We wanted to visit some ghost towns along the way. I'm not sure where we stopped on this one night. It was just a parking lot in the middle of an old town. I was sleeping on the converted dinner table by the kitchen, woke up randomly. The curtains were drawn and the microwave clock was the only source of light, besides an orb floating in the middle of the kitchen. It wasn't moving, but I was frozen in fear. I slowly ducked underneath the covers and went back to sleep. Later on, when I was 11 or 13, my dad had just finished building his house that we would hope to pass on from generation to generation. When I lived with my mom most of the year, I would live there during the summers and winter break. Most of the time, it was just him and I in a house that had great insulation, and we slept on opposite sides of the house. But regularly, I would hear scratching in the walls, especially when he was at work, and especially at night. I always felt like I was being watched, and when we got a dog, he would regularly bark at the walls, or bark at nothing while outside. My dad would say, "Oh, there's just bats in the walls," which in my opinion still doesn't make sense. This was a brand new house. and it used spray insulation. How would that work? Later on, though, one of his girlfriends and I got talking about how I always feel like I'm being watched in the house. And she said that she did too, for about 6 months. She felt threatened until I got to know her. But she humored me. We burned sage and blessed the house that week. Instantly felt better. Maybe it was placebo, but recently my mom has told me that my dad was involved in the occult, practiced voodoo in some manners. I don't know if what I was experiencing was just my imagination making up different things, or if it was a spirit that was in some Oregon woods and attached itself to my house when it was being built. Or if my dad performed a ritual to summon something to protect the house, and it thought that I wasn't supposed to be there. I'm not sure. Recently, though, I haven't experienced anything, other than the occasional paranoia that comes from watching lots of paranormal investigation stuff. I felt scared, like something was watching me extensively, and that was at military posts. Before then, nothing. And since then, nothing that would make me think of a spirit at all. Eventually, I'll be revisiting the parking lot in Virginia City. I'm pretty positive that's where it was when I first saw the orb. I want to try to contact it once I get some equipment. Maybe go to a few mines where people have passed away in Nevada. Long story shortened up, I have this thing in my house. It has no figure, and I can only catch a glimpse of it in lightly reflected surfaces like doorknobs, but often. It just watches most of the time, like a peeping Tom. Makes noises throughout the house. It used to be mostly in the ceiling till I salted the attic entry, and it stopped. It sounded like a full grown-ass person fell down with a huge thud once. It likes to knock in like Morse code, but mostly, when in bed, I leave the door cracked. It messes around in the doorway, taunting like it wants to be seen, but enjoying that it can't. Been a few times where the doorway has literally vibrated. Shrooms like. I'm not scared of it, but annoyed at this point, for several months now. Also, sometimes it brings random aromas. I swear it's farted in my face. Most recently, it smelled like auto grease. 1 a.m., while in bed, out of nowhere. Like, I don't think it's a ghost, but maybe someone's astral projection, or some kind of tech. Your guess is as good as mine, honestly. I've looked into origins and possibilities, all dead ends. I've had the house cleansed twice, and saved twice. Nada. It used to only mess with me, but recently has growled at my lady, did some kind of heavy breathing. She gets up at 3 a.m. for work. It wasn't like this when we moved in, not at first. But I left for 3 months and I came back. The whole vibe was different. Some key things that could have played a role. A black cat started showing up and I was feeding it. My firstborn was on her way. She's 6 months now. Our neighbor's body was dug up the first week we moved in. His wife killed him and buried in the backyard. During those 3 months, I was doing a lot of drugs, but I've been sober for 7+ months now. I was at a job where I suspected a group of people that I worked with were part of a satanic cult, and I surely did piss them off. I do a lot of research into events of the world, and I know some stuff that a vast majority of people don't. Like I said, I don't know what it is, who it is, but it isn't going away. It's annoying, taunting, and petty. Again, this is the short version. I didn't think I'd ever post here, as I normally am a skeptic. However, in a short time, two rather strange things have happened. My grandfather recently had a major health scare. He was in critical condition for a week, before getting better on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and finally passing away this morning. From Sunday until this morning, he was lucid in his conversations and was easy to talk to. However, he was saying crazy things, like he'd been walking on the beach all morning, that he'd seen a dragon, or that he hit his foot on the door while carrying my cousin, even though he's on a bed and he can't get up, and my cousin is 200 kilometers away. The doctors told us that this was normal with his treatments. The strange thing started when he started talking about dead people. His brother, his wife, his parents. He would say something, wait a few seconds as if someone would answer him, and then talk again. It could last a long time. In his hallucinations, he would only talk with dead people, until yesterday when he started to talk to his neighbor, who, to our knowledge, was alive. At the time, we didn't pay much attention. Today, when we heard that he died, we called his friends to invite them to the funeral ceremony, and we learned that the neighbor he was talking to had died on Monday. Still related to the story, according to the doctors, he died between 5 and 7 in the morning. My aunt came to see him as she lives far away. She sleeps in my grandfather's house in his absence. This morning, at 8:30, she was awakened by the sound of footsteps moving around the apartment. A bit worried, she sent a message in the family WhatsApp group to know if anyone had come into the apartment. Nobody had come. All the doors were closed. It was only around 9 a.m. that the hospital called us about the death. I don't know what to think. Normally, I'm very skeptical, but I'm starting to wonder. Maybe my opinion will change with this story. As a child, I always enjoyed the spirit world. I used to watch shows, read, and enjoy videos about them. I've always known children and animals have been sensitive to it. I have a 2-year-old, and her dad's house is haunted by 3 spirits. His mother has told me stories upon stories. I stay there all the time, and I've never experienced anything besides seeing things at the corner of my eyes, or feeling like I'm being watched, but never malicious. I've always felt a male presence, and as I've been told, his dad's uncle had passed away there of a heart attack, and I normally see shadows in the basement, as his room and his sister's room is down there. And for context, my 2-year-old daughter knows what a ghost is as she watches Halloween cartoons. But me, my boyfriend, and her were in the room playing around. He was talking to me, and I was laying on the bed. She was on the floor playing. Suddenly, she looks towards the door as the door is shut. She starts crying like she's scared, and we have to stop talking, ask her what's the matter. She says, "Ghosts." Her dad picks her up, and he faces her towards the door, and immediately she's screaming and grabbing him, burying her face into his chest. Immediately I grab her and I say, "Where is it?" She points, and I assure her that it won't hurt her, that it's okay. I told her to leave, please, and she did as soon as I said she was okay. I can assure you, I was more scared than she was, as I've never had it happen to myself. I guess I like to experience ghosts from others' stories, not my own. I worked at a county jail. One night I was working in the maximum security unit on the night shift. It was pretty boring, with nothing to do, really, except for checks, where you go around and look in every cell every 30 minutes or so, just to make sure everything was okay, that the inmates weren't doing anything They weren't supposed to. It had been about 15 minutes or so since my last check, and I was sitting in the control room reading a book to pass the time. The control room sits higher than floor level and looks out over the cell block. If an average height person were to walk by you, you'd only see the top of their head. As I'm reading my book, I see out of my peripherals the top of a bald head walk past the window. I knew that nobody else was in the area, as another officer would have had to go through 2 sets of remotely open doors, and there was no way past my control room. I looked up and into the cell block. I didn't see anything. I then looked at the camera monitors, which showed every angle of the cell block. Still nothing. I put my book down and exited the control room, making sure to lock the door behind me in case an inmate had gotten out of their cell. Then they couldn't lock me out of the control room. It's uncommon, but it's possible. I walked into the cell block, shining my flashlight into some of the more dimly lit areas. I took notice that I did not hear a cell door close. So if an inmate did get out of the cell, they would have either had to close their cell door incredibly quietly, or they were hiding somewhere. I radioed for another officer to respond to my location as backup. I began to conduct a check, making sure to count the inmates in each cell and pull on the door to make sure it was locked. When I reached the upper tier, one of the inmates was standing at the cell window, asked me what time it was. When I told him, he noted that I was early on my check, that I'd been checking the doors. These guys have nothing to do but watch you. The inmate asked if I saw the bald-headed guy. He must have seen the expression on my face, because he said that he has seen somebody at least once a night, usually passing quickly by the cell windows. He said that they always knew it was him because there were no bald officers on the night shift. I went back to the control room and locked it behind me. I asked the officer who responded as my backup about the bald-headed guy. He was a very senior officer, said that he'd never personally seen him, but it wasn't uncommon for officers to report it. I never saw the bald-headed guy again. Eventually, I was promoted, and every once in a while, an officer or inmate will ask me about him. My family and I live in a mobile home park where the trailers have been converted into homes. Recently, me, my wife, and the rest of the family that lives with us, we've been hearing and or smelling strange things. At first, we thought it was the stray cats or raccoons, but then things started getting weirder. We started hearing the sounds. Sometimes it would be footsteps, other times we would hear knocking. We thought at first maybe we smoked a bit too much of the devil's lettuce, but everyone else in the house was also hearing these things. That's when the sounds started sounding like people talking to us, but the weird thing was it always sounded like they were incredibly far away. The most recent thing was the smell of rotting dead of some kind. I couldn't for the life of me remember when the last time I'd smelled death like that. The smell seemed almost intense, as if it were right in front of me. I checked around our home, under it, just to make sure there were no dead animals. This happened at almost 12 at night, when my wife and I were outside smoking. I had my brother come out and check, and even he agreed that it wasn't just me who smelled it. He said it smelled like the corpse of a person. That's when I remembered why the smell seemed so familiar. Because a man who had died a few years ago, I remember how many times we walked by his corpse. They realized he died inside the wall, but I never forgot the smell. It was a very horrid smell. Still, that smell only has happened once. It hasn't come back that I know of. I'm usually one to think of scientific reasons. I ended up checking if any possible sewage had leaked from a pipe or if it came from the neighbor's home, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. These weird happenings only seem to happen at night, and most of the people that live near us are usually asleep by 10 p.m. We stay up till about midnight, 1 in the morning. My neighbors have told me that on the few occasions they've been outside at that hour, they say they feel uncomfortable, or they hear something, but they chalk it up to maybe random animals, or them being tired. I'll post an update if anything significant happens. I would also like any opinions or theories to what it might be. I need you to hear me out because I promise you, what I experienced in that old library in Massachusetts, it was not a figment of my imagination. I'd heard whispers about paranormal activity from within the walls, but chose to brush them off. I kind of regret that choice now. One evening, with the library held hostage by a roaring thunderstorm, I found myself alone in the furthest corner, poring over books in a language I couldn't decipher. Suddenly, a chill crept up my spine as the hairs on the back of my neck stiffened. Out of nowhere, I sensed a presence behind me. Still disbelieving, I turned, expecting to find a colleague playing a prank. But as I turned, I was met with an ethereal figure, floating inches above the ground. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned attire, her eyes hollow, her facial features distorted in silent agony. I bolted from the room, unable to catch my breath as I clawed my way down the hallway. I heard the woman's anguished wail following me. Now I know you might respond with skepticism, but I've shared this story because I understand the dangers of dismissing such experiences. Believe me, that haunted Massachusetts library has a dark history not to be ignored. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but don't miss a brand new one every Friday night, and my other weekly uploads every Sunday and Wednesday. Also, if you haven't already, check out the channel's shorts. It really does help the channel, and I appreciate it so much. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, the Darkest Hour YT. A huge shout out to all of my patrons whom I appreciate so very much. TRACY S, TAMARA K, Monica L, ZOEWATT, Shelley B, Donald C, Rat Girl, ALISHA S, ERIN G, NIKKI H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, LISSANE, ARLENE F, and ADRIENNE. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Thanks everyone, and stay spooky.